What is going on, guys? Welcome back. An impromptu preview leads to an impromptu recap. And I'll tell you, Jimmy, this is one of those Bellator cards. So we'll start off. First of all, our preview was longer than these three fights. There's only about 11 minutes between these three events here. So you take a look at the first fight that we talked about. MVP did what MVP does. You know, he dictated range, nullified any in-tight attempts, struck confidently, great job with the knees, beautiful switch kick. And interestingly enough, caught him twice going backwards. And the second time it was just too much. It's not even like, the death of 1,000 cuts. It was really just looking at a game plan that didn't come together well. But I think overall, when I think back to this fight, we touched on this in the preview. Where do you go with Michael Venom Page? You cannot main event these showcase fights. And there's not much more you can do with him if you continue to do this because, listen, we've seen what happens when he goes against top talent, and he looks great against lesser fighters. But when you put him someone of a higher caliber, we don't have that same confidence that he's going to come out with a win.
Yeah, I mean, the logical step forward to me is Lorenz Larkin. Winner gets a shot at MVP. I'm sorry, at Douglas Lima. That makes the most sense right now. The only fighter of note that he beat was Paul Semtex Daly. I give him credit for that one. But beyond that, it's been fighters he can look good against. Caveman Rickles is a natural 155-pounder. He puffed up to 170 for that fight. And whenever you see MVP fight, what does it leave you with? It leaves you with this sense of, boy, let's see if he can do this against better talent. And that moment never really comes. One time it did come against Douglas Lima. Lima had the perfect strategy, kick your leg out from under you and knock you out. So, as you said, showcase fights so far for MVP. But the only logical move up to me is Lorenz Larkin. And then the winner gets Lima. But how does he do against top talent? The one time he had it, he did not perform well. I give him credit once again for beating Paul Daly, but that's about it on his resume. One name in his entire career.
Going to move forward to Michael Chandler in Sydney Outlaw. Sydney Outlaw now has a big name on his career. It comes in the form of a loss, but listen, Michael Chandler had me worried. I mean, he was very calm. I like that, hands low, but, he wasn't dominating exchanges. He was working the body well. He connected well, but here's the thing at the end. And you, again, touched on this brilliantly in the preview. Michael Chandler will let him fight the other person's fight way too often. And this really looked very reminiscent to his knockout. I mean, they were going through exchanges. Either one of them could have landed. Michael Chandler is the better fighter. We knew that coming in. And he should have and did win the fight. But again, it's almost like when we talk about what happens in these events, we complete what we thought was going to happen in our minds, and we're left unfulfilled as a result. You don't look at this fight and say, man, what a great fight. What a notch in Michael Chandler's belt. This is just a piece of the puzzle to get to the greater good. And you sit there and build yourself up on the hope that maybe somebody gets upset. It's like every fight has that rocky vibe to it. And, I'm sitting here watching it tonight. Bellator confuses the life out of me. Their prelims are after the fight, which makes no sense. You have to hope that you get, these channels and hunt and peck around to figure out what they're doing and when. They actually botched when we'll talk about the main event in a minute. They tried to go back to the Pride days and have the elaborate walkouts, and they actually botched the corners. It's like the things that Bellator does just blow my mind. They previewed during this card, right? The next three cards. The next three cards, one of them is on Paramount, one is on DAZN, and one is on the app. How? How does that happen? Like right now you're in a lull for the UFC. This should be the time you're pushing the biggest things you have out. And they are. Don't get me wrong, they are. But it's pretty clear the best product that Bellator puts out is nowhere near the level of competition of what UFC puts out.
Well, I wish I could speak more intelligently about the situation currently in Bellator. I don't work for them anymore, so I don't know. When I was there, it was on Spike. And it was all about Spike and the Spike brand, and it built UFC, and let's see if it can build Bellator. And it was very focused on that, Spike branding. Since they've gone over to Paramount Network, now it's Paramount and then DAZN. I was not there for that transition. It seems like they're pulled in a lot of different directions. By DAZN, by Paramount, who's calling the shots, who's paying them the most money to put shows on. We have talked about before the confusing nature of the back-to-back shows where you might have a show, what was it, Hawaii last week, and one main event was supposed to be Josh Barnett, and the other one was Lima McFarlane. And, it's my job to keep up with this stuff, and I get confused about when someone's fighting and what card they're fighting on. And it seems like they're just trying to satisfy too many masters in terms of broadcast, DAZN and Paramount. And as you say, on the app, it's really hard to keep up with. It can be very hard to keep up with. Yeah.
You can't make it a job for me to keep up with your product. I mean, UFC used to have the International Fight Week, 3 nights, 3 fights. We all loved it. Bellator seems to do it now with these back-to-back fights, and half of us don't care. And it really, like today, it really shined through. When I'm looking at 3 different shows, 3 different carriers, 3 different ways to watch, and it's just said so passively. Like here's what's coming up next for Bellator. I hope you've got the DAZN app. I hope you've got Paramount Network, and I hope you've downloaded our app because you need them all to watch these. Not gonna work. Moving forward, Fedor and Rampage. Jimmy, to me, again, it's in a nutshell of Bellator. This is the fight that we all wanted to see. This is what we were tuning in for. And I love Rampage Jackson. One of the true reasons I got into MMA. Who doesn't love the guy, right? I've never seen somebody that's not a fan of Rampage. But I don't know the person that came out tonight. It wasn't Rampage. It wasn't Quentin Jackson. It was a guy that just didn't want to be there. And I get it. Fedor is an absolute killer. And if this is the end of his career, then to me, it went out on a high note because he beat somebody that is a legend in his own right. But when I watch somebody come out and just not fight defensively, not fight offensively, just stand there. I hate to say it. It makes me feel like you're just there for a paycheck. And I know that's not true because I know Rampage put a lot of hard work into this. But the fact of the matter is we see more and more Bellator purchases of fighters that don't deliver the product when it comes down to putting it on screen. And this is just another case of that. This is a household name that they may no longer have in the stable in Fedor and may not have any viable selling points with Rampage after this.
All right, this is going to get a little around the world here, but there's a great quote, I think it's by Napoleon, and it was, "A man does not die for 6 pence a day." And obviously, I'm paraphrasing a little bit. It's been a long time since I've had to study Napoleon, but it was the heart of his statement. A man does not die for 6 pence a day. You have to convince him he's fighting for something greater. And he was talking about war. A soldier has to believe in the cause in which they are fighting. MMA is the same way. You can pay somebody to fight, and they're prize fighters, and we talk about getting paid. I have seen the difference, I don't know how many times, between a fighter who is fighting because they are getting paid and a fighter who really believes they are fighting for something bigger in the sport. They're fighting for a title. They're fighting for their legacy. They're fighting to move up. They're fighting for something else other than a paycheck. What we have seen so many times with fighters in Rampage's position in Bellator is they don't have that secondary motivation. I've gone as far as I'm going to go in this sport. I'm not fighting to be champ. I'm not fighting to add to my legacy. I'm not fighting for anything beyond the paycheck. Now, sometimes a paycheck's enough. Some people are just professional enough and, hey, I'm getting paid. I'm going to fight and I'm put it in every time. Without a brass ring to really go for, you rarely get the best out of a fighter. So many, and it's across a lot of different sports, meaning I've seen great players, great athletes in any sport, go with teams that aren't playoff bound and they don't look very good. That spark isn't there. I'm not trying to win a Super Bowl. I got my contract. I'm on a mid-level team. We're never going to go anywhere. Why take that extra hit if I don't have to? We see it all the time, especially in combat sports, when the stakes are so high and the cost is so high. And I saw And I've seen so far in Bellator a Rampage Jackson who isn't fighting for anything more than the paycheck. And the problem is it has shown. And it showed tonight.
To put a cap on that, I believe and trust every word that you just said. If you watch Lorenz Larkin's fight, there is a guy that is not fighting for a check, that goes out to put on a performance every single time. And anybody that sits through this main card, to be fair, I believe it is a little bit of a tragedy that you don't have somebody with that will and desire fighting higher on the card, getting more views, and instead you kind of have to build this around your names. And when you build your sport around names, when you build the divisions you have around the marquee value rather than the fighter quality, I think you get where Bellator is. And I think tonight was a great showcase of something they need to sit back and look at and say, hey, on paper, these things sound great. On posters, these matchups look fantastic. But the product we're putting out is in no way competing with the landscape of overall MMA and leaves our fans generally dissatisfied with the end result. Love to know your guys.
Before you cap this, I have to say, Ryan, in our preview, which we, just so the fans know, I'm not at home, which is why the audio quality isn't what it normally is. I'm with family in LA. Ryan texted me and said, hey, let's do a Bellator pre-fight show. Okay, I got it together. I'm sitting on my laptop. We did it kind of last minute. We shouldn't be this right. You get what I'm saying? We broke down every single one of these fights, and every single issue we talked about popped up. There wasn't one surprise. There wasn't one thing that gave you and I, Ryan, as fans, that moment of unpredictability that makes MMA MMA. We didn't get one of those moments. We saw a showcase of MVP, of Chandler, of Fedor, but you and I broke this down kind of last minute and nailed the 3 fights we talked about. That shouldn't happen. That unpredictability that makes MMA special should be a factor in these fights, and it wasn't.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, there's no art of storytelling when you know the ending, right? When we spoil it for you, then there's no point. You can't go back and listen to that preview and not tell if it was recorded before or after the event. And that's the tragedy of it all. I mean, these are things that really diminish the quality of the sport in general. And, like I said, if Bellator wants to continue down this path, they're more than welcome to. But at this rate, they're going to be signing fighters well past their prime, trying to make their name on matchups that we think we want to see until we see them. So with that said, we appreciate you guys watching this. We will be back in the week with more commentary.